Last week we began with our series, or an introduction to the series, Reflecting Jesus, by looking into the Sermon on the Mount. And our key verse for this whole series is from Matthew 7:20. You will recognize them by how they live. And so that's the challenge for us, is to not only call ourselves disciples of Jesus, but to actually live it out. And our lives need to change in accordance with that. I just want to begin by telling you I don't know, it's not a fairy tale, a legend, I guess, and it's not about me. I'm not a legend in my own mind, but it's an ancient legend, beginning maybe in Arthurian times, about the Fisher King, about a king who all he could do was actually go fishing, became powerless in a lot of ways, and one of the things he was supposed to do was protect the Holy Grail and preserve it for his people and so on. So there's a lot of different stories about the Holy Grail, some of them funny, some of them not so funny, but there's been this ongoing quest for centuries to find the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper. But in this king's inability to be able, in the wound that he suffers and his inability to continue, there needs to be a chosen one who comes along and redeems him and brings healing into his life and into their life as well. And so the whole story kind of revolves around that. And it's been used and retold down through the centuries. The Sun Also Rises, Ernest Hemingway's book, uses that same motif in the storytelling. The movie, I think 20 years ago maybe, called The Fisher King, Robin Williams movie, uses that same kind of story, spins it in a little different way, puts a modern twist upon it. But the whole idea being someone is trapped in their wounded condition, and there needs to be someone who comes in from outside to redeem them. Now, in spiritual terms, we look at ourselves as being the ones who are wounded, and we see Christ coming in to redeem us and bring healing to us in our condition. But it also sort of goes beyond that, and Jesus calls us to beyond that, to take a look at the people who are around us as being the people who are in a wounded condition, and we come into their lives, into their world, and bring some restoration, some healing, some redemption into their lives. But the interesting thing about this, and this is kind of, connects into the story of the Fisher King, is it also brings healing into the life of the person who has come as healer. And so we have that phrase that we maybe have heard, maybe you've used, called the wounded healer, that we are wounded healers, that we are people who ourselves have wounds and we have struggles, we have things that we bring in our life, yet Jesus calls us to enter into the lives of others and to bring healing to them. Now the challenge is it forces us to set aside our own agendas to be able to meet the needs of the people who are around us. And if you watch the movie by that name, Fisher King, you'll see that the challenge is to get beyond ourselves so that we can enter into the life of someone else. But as we do, we recognize that there's some healing that's happening within us as well as we engage in their world and bring some healing to them. In the terms of our ministry, for example, I spent a couple of years working with Yonge Street Mission in Toronto, and I know that some of you have been involved in different types of ministries sort of beyond the types of things that we might do here. And the challenge for us is to get beyond our own securities and our own self-centeredness, if you will, to be able to enter into the lives of other people and to be able to help them in the position that they find themselves. It's very easy for us to give money to a problem. If you're walking down the street and somebody is asking for your spare change, it's easy for us to give money to that, whether you do or you don't. And you might have reasons that you do give or reasons that you don't give. Or if an organization says, please give us money so that we can help and we can continue our ministry. Like Harvest House. The walk, was it last Saturday, like a week ago, two weeks ago? And, it was creating awareness for the ministry of Harvest House in Moncton amongst street people, homeless people, and people who are struggling and need some new direction in their lives. It was also a way to raise some funds for that. But here's the good news for us, is that we can give funds and Harvest House will do the work and do the ministry. But what Jesus is really calling us to is getting involved in the lives of people. It's real easy for us to give the money. It's much more difficult for us to give our lives and to get involved in other people's lives. But yet that's what Jesus calls us to. And so I just want to set that up as we begin to look at the beginning part of the Sermon on the Mount. Well, really the whole Sermon on the Mount challenges us to live a different way. But this first part, as we look at the Beatitudes and being salt and light, that Jesus is calling us to get involved in the world, to get involved in life change, not just to look at it from a distance and not just to say, well, I'll pray for you, or not just to give the $20 or whatever it is, but to actually set aside our own agenda and get involved in the lives of the people. So today we're looking at Jesus' character and influence. This whole thing of the Sermon on the Mount is really, as I talked about, a self-portrait of Jesus. Jesus telling us how he expects us to live, but really being a reflection of who he is. And as we look at the entire Scriptures, we see that even the giving of the law is God revealing himself to his people. When Moses goes up on the mountain and he asks God, he says, God, show me your glory. God, reveal yourself to me. And God says, I am the Lord, the merciful and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. And then he gives Moses all kinds of different things, 10 Commandments, for example, that are instructing the people how they are to live their lives. But it's really a reflection of who God is and what his heart is for his people. And so we find that here in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 as well. The question that we can ask about the Beatitudes, as Ty read them for us, is who are they for? Who are the people that are being talked about in the Beatitudes? And what qualities are they to have? And what are the blessings that Jesus promises? And so these are some of the things that we're going to be looking at this morning. We're not going to pick apart each individual Beatitude, but rather look at them as a whole and consider them as 8 fundamental emotional attributes, or character attributes, if you will, that are a formula for personal and societal health. Ways that Jesus tells us to live our lives that bring health into ourselves and bring health into our community. Now, the word beatitude just comes from the Latin, which is the blessings, the blessedness, and so it's just something that stuck. It wasn't in the, in terms of our language mostly. And when we say the Beatitudes, people tend to know where they're found, but we don't often think about why they're called that. But that's just a little bit of Latin for you to include in your vocabulary. But most people have heard of these. Most people who know anything about Jesus have heard of the Beatitudes, and when we say some of these things or read some of them, it kind of makes sense. We've heard some of these things. But we don't really maybe understand them fully, or we don't really grasp them in terms of the significance that Jesus places on them for us to be able to live our lives. But I would encourage you to consider them as fundamental truths that need to be a part of our lives for our well-being and for the well-being of society. Does that mean that I follow them all? No. Does that mean that I think I'm successful in understanding them and implementing them? Absolutely not. Still working on that. And as Paul says, we keep striving. We keep working on these things. We keep looking ahead to the day when we will stand before Jesus. But in the meantime, we keep working on these things because we haven't attained that perfection yet. But the first 4 I would suggest are inward characteristics, and the second 4 of the Beatitudes are more outward characteristics. So the inward characteristics, the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, and those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Well, being poor in spirit, are you aware of your own spiritual need? Are you aware of the fact that you cannot achieve this deep spiritual understanding and an awareness of God without God's help in your life. Jesus says that we cannot understand the things of the Spirit unless we are born again of the Spirit. He tells Nicodemus in John chapter 3. Do we understand that we have this separation from God, that we need to get to know Him in a deeper way, and it's from His side that we need to be able to get that? Those who mourn, and it's not just about mourning our own loss, although it's all connected, because any time that we have something in our own lives that causes us sadness or causes us to mourn, it's as a result of the fact that we live in a world that is fallen. We live in a world where sin is present. And when bad things happen, that's the result of sin around us. And so that causes us to have that sense of mourning or sadness upon us. But in a bigger sense, those who mourn are those who recognize the effect of sin in this world, and it bothers us. We take that seriously, not only for ourselves, but for the world around us, that we identify with the fact that this world is an evil place, and that it's not right, and that we ought to be about things that are going to redeem the world in which we live. And just listening to the news in the past week, there are things like a multiple death in a train station in China where some guys went on a stabbing rampage, where a guy started stabbing people in a warehouse in Edmonton, where people in Kiev are being shot at by the people who are supposed to protect them, where women and children are being set up in Syria so that they can be bombed to oblivion. Those kinds of things, as we hear them in our world, should bother us. They should bother us. They're not just things that are happening in another part of the world and to somebody else and that they don't connect with us. They should be bothering us. And those are things that we should be praying about, involved in, and we also should be picking up on the things that are happening in our own community around us. Things that bother us. I mentioned this in Sunday school class this morning. There are some people from out of town who bought the corner store up here a year or so ago. And some people stopped going to that store. And, I've talked to different people and heard different things going around. And why? Because they're outsiders. They're not us. They don't look like us. They don't talk like us. So I'm not going to go to their store. And I'm not saying it's like all of the population of Sackville, because it's, after all, just a small store in Middle Sackville, and I don't know how many people, would frequent it in the course of a week, but even if one or two have that attitude and stay away, that's wrong. That's just wrong. And ought not to be that way. And those things need to bother us. Those things need to be of a concern to us. As Jesus demonstrates in His own life, as He interacts with different people, and the disciples are saying, "What? You talked with a woman? What? You're allowing children to come forward? What? The blind and the crippled are allowed to touch you?" And Jesus says, "Well, of course they are." And so the mourning has to connect us with the fact that there's sin in the world, and we need to be about kingdom business in dealing with it. Being meek means that humility that allows us to be able to look at the needs of other people around us. And those who hunger and thirst for righteousness is a passion for the kingdom of God. Jesus says in John 18, verse 36, He says, "My kingdom is not of this world." My kingdom is not of this world. It's a whole different kingdom. And He said, I want you to have that same passion, that hunger and thirst for something that's beyond this world, or as we would say, out of this world, right? Something really good. And those are the four inward things. The four outward things would be the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, and the persecuted. God shows us mercy in our lives, and we ought to be merciful to others. Sometimes that's a difficult thing for us to do. And to be pure in heart. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14, it says, "Without holiness, no one will see the Lord." Also says, "Without faith it is impossible to please God, but without holiness, no one will see the Lord." So, wow. I mean, this is the verse that really gets to me sometimes, because I know there are things that go through my head or things in my life that I know are not particularly Christ-like, and I'm thinking, man, I'm in trouble here. But this is Christ's admonition to us that we need to be seeking the Lord with all of our heart, the greatest commandment. Peacemakers, those are people who really self-sacrifice in order to work peace in relationships and work peace in our world. I remember hearing a speaker one time talk about the greatest way to make friends is to choose sides. Because as soon as I choose a side, then all of a sudden I have friendships among all the people on that side. But as soon as I position myself as a peacemaker, I'm in between. And I don't have friends on either side. And that's a tough place to be in, but that's exactly where Jesus puts himself. And the persecuted, people who are committed to live for the right things. To live for the right things. And Jesus says, if we live out all of these different beatitudes, if we live out all of these principles, then it will affect our lives, and it'll affect our community around us. And this is where he changes, or transitions, if you will, into saying that we are salt and light, that we are the salt of the earth and the light of the world, that our influence in our world depends upon our character, that how we affect the world around us is dependent upon what's coming out of the inside. You know, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Whatever we say, whatever we do is a result of something that's been rattling around inside of us. And the more good things we put in there, the more time we're focused on the kingdom, the more that's going to come out. As we say, garbage in, garbage out. You know, whatever's going in is going to find its way out somewhere. And so Jesus encourages us to live like he does.